It was incredible to be involved in the kind of revolution of practical effects in the early 80s and in the early 90s. It was, you know, I actually don't believe in such a thing as luck. I think that you create your own destiny. So, you know, some people might say that I came in at the right time, at to surf that cresting wave of practical makeup effects. But it was an amazing time to be in that business. And yeah, well, you know, being in Fangoria way back in the early 80s was an amazing thing for all of us, because I mean, in the early 80s, it will never happen again. I was just thinking about this earlier today, because we, meaning myself, people like Kevin Yeager, Rob Bottin, all of us, not necessarily the first generation, Dick Smith, Rick Baker, but the second generation of us effects artists, we were rock stars. I mean, we'd go to these conventions and have groupies, and people would ask for our autographs, and it was crazy. And of course, we had all these magazines like Fangoria and Gore Zone, and it was a brilliant forum to show people across the world what we were doing, and there was a huge following at that point. It was really an interesting experience, and it's kind of faded over the years, as I'm sure everyone knows. And I was actually just thinking about this today, thinking, you know, in the old days when I did all of these movies, the 200 films or whatever I did, I never really thought of it as making even the slightest dent in film history. But now, in a way, now that kind of digital technology has taken over what we used to do with animatronics and prosthetics, I feel like it's kind of put a cap on what we used to do. And so now, 100 years from now, people, geeks like you and I, will look back and there'll be a focused place to look at, because you'll look at people like me and go, fuck, that guy was doing really cool stuff. And then, you know, it's all digital or Martian mind meld 100 years from now, right? So, but there was this one period of time, the early 80s, when people like me and my colleagues were doing amazing, amazing stuff. And these magazines help promote that. And so it's kind of a cool thing. These days, I think everybody knows that digital technology is a bunch of guys in a darkened room. And I'm not saying bad things about digital technology, I love it. But a bunch of guys crunching numbers, right? Zeros and ones. There's no room to be fooled, and I think that the old techniques of makeup effects were more like true magic. What you see a guy on stage pull a rabbit out of a hat, you know he didn't pull that rabbit out of the hat, right? But you're involved in that. How did he pull the rabbit out of the hat? You know, it gets the audience involved, and I think that's what's missing from effects these days. Making something real, when you're sculpting something, when you're really in the real world painting something, when you're destroying something or having something grow or change right before your eyes, it's a beautiful, beautiful feeling. And that's all the blood and all the sweat and everything you go through when you're on a deadline. When you do these types of effects, it's not worth it. It's bullshit. It was just, you're not getting paid enough. There's never enough time, never enough money. But what the payoff is, when you sit in that darkened theater with an audience and you watch this magic put together finally by the sound people and the director and the editor, and the audience just gasps and they have no idea how you did it. And it just, you're just sitting there in the dark going, I did it, I made magic. I'm a magician. That's the payoff. Night of Demons actually was the first movie I ever did with my company. It really honestly was. It was 1986 that I got the job, and I had just left Boss Films after Fright Night and Ghostbusters, Poltergeist 2, Big Trouble in Little China, a bunch of films like this. And but yet, I was under the umbrella of Richard Edlund and Boss Films, and I had never done my own film. So I had to start from the ground up. And so I'm like, oh my God, I worked on American Werewolf, I've worked on all these movies, The Howling, and now I've got to do some crap little low-budget thing called Night of the fucking Demons? I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And I go to this little tiny office in Hollywood with no air conditioning, and I'm sitting there with these producers, and I'm like, yeah, whatever you guys want, lipstick, demons, who cares? I was just like, this is below me. And but it was my first movie, and I had just opened my own studio, and I thought, well, I want to get the job anyway, because Witches of Eastwick hired Rob Bottin. It's like, they're not going to hire me. They'll probably get Rob too. They'll get Greg Canham. They'll get anybody. It's like, I'm never going to make it in this business. By the time I got home that night, I had a phone call. These were the days of answer phones, I had a message saying, "You've got the job." They didn't even look at anybody else. They just, "We liked your energy, we want to hire you." And so they gave me $60,000, I think, which is not a lot of money to handle a whole film. And since I had never actually handled the finances of a film, this was my first time, I was so nervous that I would spend it all and run out of money to pay the team to do the effects. So I didn't do my laundry. I absolutely refused to eat out or do anything for the whole 3 months we worked on this film, because I was like, what if something goes wrong? What if I run out of money and can't pay my crew? I have to just... So yeah, I think that one of the highest points in my career, some might see it as a low point, was after the last day of shooting on Night of the Demons, I did my laundry and I washed out all of the blood, the fake blood from my clothes, because I'm like, okay, I can afford the $5 to go to a laundromat. This was whenever, it was 25 years ago. And so, yeah, I don't think I answered your question at all, but it was fun.
What the hell happened?
Help me, please, I need to sedate him.
Easy, easy. Easy, easy. What's happening with him?
Well, you know, when Brian called me on Arachnid, number one, he didn't have enough money to do it. He calls me up and says, "I got a giant spider movie." I'm like, "Okay, great, you got a giant budget." He's like, "No, I have no money. I just want a giant spider. We don't want to do any of it digitally." And I'm like, "Okay, how big is a spider, Brian?" And he's like, "It's as big as you can make it." And I'm like, "Okay, let me try. Let me get back to you on this. Let me work on this." He goes, "Oh, by the way, and we're shooting in Barcelona." I'm like, that in and of itself perked me up, because I love to travel. And so I'm like, "Oh, great. We'll make it a little bit smaller. We'll save a little bit of money, and I get to go to Barcelona for a few weeks. It'll be great." But it was an interesting process, because the film is actually, it's filled with effects. I mean, it's not just the giant spider. There are transformation effects, there's all kinds of worms and weirdness in it. And it was a real challenge to get this stuff done on a low budget schedule and amount of money. It was incredibly challenging. I mean, there are scenes that no one in their right mind these days would ever attempt practically. For instance, there is a warehouse. I think the lead characters are barricaded in it, and the spider shows off one of its powers, which is to shrink its body down in order to get through a very, very small grate. And if you read this in a script, a 12-foot leg spread spider crawls through a 2-foot grate. Now, how the hell would anyone in their right mind go into a production meeting and say, "Yep, I can do that"? Practically. I'll actually, well, what we did is, we had no choice. We had to do it. It was where Brian's like, "No digital, no digital." And so we made a miniature, ourselves at our own studio of this compound. And then we made a miniature spider. It was probably 1/4 scale, maybe 1/5 scale. And it really was, it's one of my favorite effects in the film, because it's all practical and it's a miniature. And we actually physically made this tiny puppet of this spider deflate and rearrange its exoskeletal figure, and rod by a combination of cable puppeteering and actual open marionette strings and rods. We just deflated it, squeezed it through this tiny grate, and then the second it starts coming out, we started inflating it again, and it becomes its real shape and size. And then, we drop to full-size legs landing on the floor, and then you pull back and you've got your real spider. And so, those days it was really fun to overcome issues like that. The giant bugs from the 50s, it's all a metaphor. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that kind of stuff. I mean, more so than Arachnid, Arachnophobia was trying to slip into that niche, to make it kind of funny and yet still kind of scary, but not too scary, so it wouldn't turn off a lot of audience members. But no, I mean, anybody who kind of commits their life to creating monsters and these wild effects has obviously been really, really, really influenced and inspired by the things that came before. And I just hope it continues to happen, that the torch continues to get passed forward. And who knows what's going to happen, future of effects, though. I've thought about it a lot because, as we all know, effects, the nature of effects, the color of effects has changed. It's not all digital now, but the audiences typically think it is, whether it is or not. I'm just waiting for the aliens to land and perfect mind meld technology, and all those digital fuckers will be out of a job. That's what I can't wait for. But yeah, I mean, regarding going to Spain, a long time ago, I stopped enjoying going on set. Going on set is like being in a war. It's literally like being in a minefield. It's like enemy lines. I mean, you're right there on the front lines. Because when you're on set, it's like the producer, the director, the AD. Everyone has got a gun, a semi-automatic rifle aimed at you, and they're saying, make it work right now, instantly. And if not, they shoot you and they kill you. And it's like, why would you want to put yourself in that position? I don't want to be shot at. It's like, I'd rather go to my studio at 10 a.m. in the morning and make monsters. But when you're on set, it's like you got to get up at 2 in the morning and drive through places you've never been, and you end up with all these people and you don't understand the language, and they've got the guns aimed at you, and if something doesn't work, they shoot at you, and it's insane. So, of course, the problem with that is everyone who hired my company expected that they were hiring me, and I'm like, no, you're not really hiring me, you're hiring my company. My company will go to your set, not me. I'm going to be home having a nice glass of Merlot by 7 o'clock at night, and I'm going to get up at 10, and I'm going to go in and make other monsters for other movies, and if you want to shoot people, you're going to shoot my crew, not me. But ultimately, Brian's like, no, you have to come to set. You've got a giant spider. I know these other people. I've worked with you on 2 movies. I had already done a couple of films with Brian, Necronomicon and Return of the Living Dead, part 3 or whatever. And so I did. I flew out to Barcelona, and I still don't think I ever made it to set. I had dinner with Brian one night, and I'm like, Brian, I got to move on. You're doing fine. But I did get a free trip to Barcelona out of it, and a nice dinner with Brian.
Second thoughts?
No. Get your gear to the airport and we'll take off tomorrow at 8.
Excellent.
I knew that Jack Shoulder, the director, had done The Hidden. And the only feeling, I never saw the film, but the only feeling that came to me was that that fucker hired Kevin Yeager instead of me to do the thing that came in the mouth. So it's like, I get that sometimes. I used to. It's like, if it's a movie that I either bid on or designed for or didn't get, I boycott it. I won't watch it. And the director can go to hell from then on. It's like, no, you didn't hire me. I'm not going to be your fan. So that was kind of the case with Jack. It's like, all right, well, it's really Brian hiring me in this case. It's not Jack, so. When I came to Barcelona and had dinner with Brian to make sure I was doing a very bratty, very 80s or early 90s makeup effects thing. I was on a trip around the world. I'd met a girl, and I wanted to, as our first date, I wanted to take her around the world. It's as ridiculous as it gets. I mean, so I had a business meeting in Japan, and then I went to northern Japan, and then we stopped in Barcelona, and then we went to Amsterdam, and then Ibiza. We went all over the place, and then we went back to Barcelona. Of course, all of these trips and these stops being based on the fact that there was business there, right? And so I was being flown around the world with this girl. It was like, it was a blur. It was really crazy. So, no, I did not. But when I got to Barcelona, Brian absolutely insisted, and this, you have to remember, I've got this itinerary. I'm going to Ibiza. It was like the whole rave thing in the summer there, right? And I've got to be there at a certain, that was my next trip from Barcelona. I'd planned it mathematically to stop off and go, Brian, everything must be going great. Good to see you. I'm going to go take some ecstasy and dance. And and he's like, it's a disaster. You can't leave. You can't go. You have to go on set. And number one, it's a night shoot. A night shoot. And I hate night shoots, because you have to sleep in the daytime. You wake up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, then you have to stay up all night. He goes, you have to stay here for the next 3 weeks. Jack is not okay with directing this huge spider. You have to direct it. I want you to direct second unit. And I'm like, Brian, this doesn't quite fit in with my trip around the world thing. So it was nice of you to let me make this spider, but no, I got to go to Ibiza. And I'm like, you'll be fine. And you know what? I look back at that movie and I have to say I am really pleased with the effects in it. I really am. I mean, for a low-budget movie with a bunch of people in a foreign country, I love what we did on it. I think we did some pretty outstanding stuff, and it's all practical. I'm really pleased with it. So maybe I let Brian down, but I still got to go dancing in Ibiza. Yeah, I got out of special effects for a couple of reasons. I saw the iceberg, the wreck, the disastrous wreck of our business coming years before it actually hit the iceberg and sunk our business. And I hate to say this, all of you guys that are still out there doing this, but the truth is the truth. I mean, I saw it coming and I jumped ship because what I learned in this business was a joy of filmmaking, a joy of hunkering down shoulder to shoulder with the filmmakers and creating and being respected. Because in the day, I would get a script and it'd be like, who cares what these words are? I would call up the director or the producer and I'd go, look, we can do something better. We can do something more. We can do this. And they're like, well, if you've got enough money to do it, we trust you. They would hire people like me because they trusted our artistic vision. That's all changed. It's completely changed. And so there was a huge amount of self-satisfaction in the beginning, in the 80s, the early 90s, for working on a film. I felt like I was respected and I felt like my vision was getting considered and somehow making it into the film. And, you know, as the table started to slowly turn, with digital effects taking more and more of the lion's share of work, a couple of things happen. Number one, you sit in the darkened theater and that thing I was talking about earlier, that sense of, oh my God, I've fooled this audience, it went away because whether I had done the effect or not, they just assumed it was digital. So it's like, well, I might as well just leave the theater because it doesn't matter how hard I try or how hard I work, no one is ever, and you know, so I started to introduce myself to people 10 years ago and I'm like, yeah, I'm Steve Jonhson. I did, not that I would introduce myself this way, but when it would come up, I did The Abyss, I did this or that. And they're like, really? I thought they did all that stuff digitally. And I would just go, oh, fuck, time to move on, because the satisfaction had left. But also something else happened, and that was the budgets got smaller because more and more money had to go to the digital effects houses. The time to create the effects got less because no one thought about it as much beforehand. They would just think it's all going to be done digitally. And what happened as a result of that is the smartest people in the effects industry and the practical effects into it, the real heroes, the real geniuses, the engineers, the artists, they jumped ship too. They're like, fuck this, I'm going back to Indianapolis, I'm going to go back to MIT, wherever I came from, because I'm not getting paid enough, there's not enough time, it's just a disaster. And so then people like me are left going, okay, I have a very limited talent pool to work with, I've got not as much money as I need, not as much time as I need, and guess what's going to happen? When I show up on set, the effects will not be what they should have been, they won't be what they could have been. It simply became no fun anymore. I mean, there was really no reason to do it because in the old days it was fun. And there are two very specific reasons why I left. About 4 years ago, is I was involved with Spike Jonze on a film called Where the Wild Things Are. And he came to me, and I love Spike's work. I mean, everything from being John Malkovich to his music videos. I think the guy's got a great, clear, genius vision. And so I'm like, anything. And then he comes to me and he meets with me, and guess what else? Dave Eggers, one of my favorite writers who wrote, his most famous book is A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius, which he was nominated for the Pulitzer for. He came very close to winning it. So I'm like, okay, Dave Eggers and Spike Jonze. And on top of that, Spike Jonze comes to my office and he goes, okay, we want 12-foot tall creatures with huge arm spreads, practically. We want all of the animatronics. And he goes, I want to shoot this like the most realistic documentary style you could ever. And he goes, I want you to do it. he goes, it's like your stuff just really shines as the only guy out there who has a team now that can really accomplish this and think outside the box. And we certainly don't want to kill our actors in New Zealand, in the desert, in the jungle. And so I thought, well, thank God, maybe animatronics are going to make a resurgence, and maybe someone like Spike Jonze and I can have a little bit of something to do with that. And so this was about 4 years ago. I designed and designed. I was awarded the job. And of course, at the very end of our presentation, when we got we had figured out how to do it. And it took 6 months to figure out, number one, how not to kill these actors because they're huge suits. Number two, how big to make them, what would be practical, what wouldn't it. When I say practical, I mean what would actually work. So we tried every technique possible. And we came up with some pretty damn cool stuff. Well, we also were budgeting the film during that period of time, because how can you budget a film? How can you put a price tag on all of these creatures? You've seen the film, I'm sure, without knowing how you're going to do it. And so the reasonable conclusion that Spike and the producers and I came to is, we'll design how to do it, we'll do some prototypes, and in a few months, based on what we learn, we'll put a price tag on it. Well, I gave them a price tag, and the next day they called up and said, "You're fired." Basically, it was that simple. And I was like, oh my God, it's 2006, and I still have to deal with this. Really? Are you kidding me? And they said, not only we're not gonna use you on the show, we're gonna do it all digitally anyway. We'll get the Hensons or someone to make some big arms and some bodies, but your old animatronic stuff's out of style. It's not gonna work. It's gonna be too heavy. It's gonna cost too much, and we can't get it to perform anyway. So what were you thinking? And so I went home, and I had just lost something like $15 million, with one phone call, and I'm like, okay. Not only did I lose $15 million, I just lost my career. I just lost an opportunity that I had thought for 6 months was going to kind of show the world that this stuff could be done. And so, I did what any psychotic bipolar person would do. I packed up my studio and went to Costa Rica for a year. It was like, that was it. I'm like, you know what? Fuck you guys. I'm done. You can't, I'm done. Oh, well, I forgot the fact that I was working on Spider-Man 3 at the same time. The guys from Spider-Man called me and did the same thing. They're like, you know what, this Viper character we're going to make? It's too much trouble. We're going to do it digitally. And I'm like, you have paid me $150,000 to figure this out. We know how we could do this. And they're like, I know you, maybe, no, we're just going to do it digitally. Click. Another $5 million gone. And I'm like, okay, I have to become a fugitive in a Central American company. I have no other choice. That's it. So that's pretty much what happened.
Thank you very much, Steve.
You're like, he's getting drunk. We gotta get him out of here.
No. Please keep talking.